Greetings, everybody out there in jazz land, YouTube land, internet land, whatever land. I'm the Jazz and Blues audiophile with you once again for an episode. And this time on this episode, I want to discuss one of the truly great, absolute legends of music. All genres confounded, but of jazz in particular, of course. And I'm talking about the man who's on the piano in the background right now, getting ready to get into his theme song. And if you haven't recognized that right now, well, you'll soon recognize it if you're a jazz fan anyway. And I'm talking about, of course, the one and only Duke Ellington, one of the few legendary jazz musicians to appear on Time magazine's cover in the late 50s. And there's good reason for that, because he is the greatest name in jazz. And I mean that. He is the Mozart of jazz. He is the aristocrat of jazz, the true great composer of all time. He's probably one of the greatest composers of the 20th century, if not the greatest composers of the 20th century. And I do mean that. I compare him with Mozart, and I'm not exaggerating when I compare this man with Mozart. And I'll tell you why. Because Duke has got 1,700 compositions to his name. Think about that. 1,700 compositions to his name. We're not kidding here. That's a lot of compositions. That's a lot of writing. And these compositions, they not only include his great 1920s early hits of the late 20s with his jungle band, recorded with his jungle band, but also, of course, his hits of the big band era days, of the 30s and 40s, like Things Ain't What They Used to Be, Caravan, Don't Get Around Much Anymore, etc., etc., etc. But he also composed several suites, several operas, several ballets, and near the end of his life, concerts of sacred music destined to honor God himself. So we're not kidding when we're talking about Duke Ellington as an absolute legend, a great, huge name of jazz, probably the greatest jazz man that ever was. And I know there's a lot of talk because, of course, I listen to a lot of people on YouTube talking about jazz. I'm a jazz nut myself. And I participate. I'm a member of certain jazz groups also on the internet. And there's a lot of buzz around two names in jazz. You know, in the last 30, 40 years, we've been talking about these two guys all the time. I'm talking about Miles Davis and John Coltrane, which are two legendary musicians in their own right, for different reasons, of course. And I'm not downplaying their importance. I'm not downplaying their own greatness. But I do want to say, these guys, Coltrane and Davis, are flies when you compare them with the great Duke Ellington. They are the size of a fly. And I'm going to tell you something, because when you delve into this man, Ellington's recorded work, through all his compositions, you delve into his life, you delve into everything he did musically, and you realize this man is a huge, huge giant, an absolute giant, comparable to the great Mozart or other great classical composers, except he's in the jazz music realm. Now, even the great Miles Davis, who was not prone to make positive comments about other musicians, once said about Ellington, he said, we should all gather around Ellington one day, us musicians, and kneel in front of him and thank him for everything he did musically during his lifetime, because he is the legend in jazz. So if even Miles Davis was able to say that, that says a lot, I think. Anyway, that's my opinion. It's my opinion, and I'm sharing it with you out there with the world. But anyway, I think Duke Ellington is an absolutely fascinating person. Just studying his person, the type of man he was, the type of musical lover that he was. He was just a lover of music. And he said once in an interview, he said, he says, when I see beauty anywhere, in nature, in art, in a beautiful woman or anything, I immediately start to think how I could translate that beauty musically. in the musical language? How could I translate this beauty and make it known musically? That's a wonderful thing. I mean, just think about that. It's wonderful, wonderful. Somebody that thinks that way is truly in love with music and in a profound way. And that's why I think he titled his autobiography "Music is My Mistress," because Duke Ellington, when you study his life just a little bit, you realize this man was a true, true lover of music. So anyway, I think this is something that has to be said, has to be restated often and often. He's truly the greatest name in jazz. I think that's undisputable. Again, when you start to look at the facts, start to listening to the recorded evidence and all that, it's an indisputable thing. And I wish that people in the jazz world would defocus from these two names that I mentioned earlier, John Coltrane and Miles Davis, as if they were the beginning and the end all of jazz, which they are not. They are true, they are of themselves two of the legendary musicians in jazz, but they are two of hundreds of great musicians that had absolutely tremendous careers. And next to Ellington, they are not that big. So, what I want to talk specifically, though, is this particular recording of which was done. It was a triumphant performance by the Ellington Orchestra at the 1956 Newport Jazz Festival. I want to talk specifically about this recording because it's a very important one. First of all, it's got a dynamite performance by Ellington and his band, which is comprised of some of the top-notch jazz musicians to come out of the swing era, and that remained with him pretty much for over 30 years. Now, how many band members can say that? Big band leaders can say that, hey, I've retained pretty much the same personnel for more than 30 years. Very rare are those names, but Ellington could do that because Ellington was such a marvelous composer that, as he once said, my real instrument is not the piano. My real instrument is my band. And what he did for his band members was to bring out the best of them, the best in them. He knew how to arrange, how to create musical numbers that would feature certain of his musicians in their best possible light and bring out their best possible talent. And that was amazing, and the musicians knew about that. They knew that. They knew that Ellington was composing specifically certain numbers for them to showcase them, and they appreciated that tremendously. And that's what kept them coming back for more all the time, I believe. So that shows also the self-giving that Ellington was able to do musically for others, for his musicians, as much as for himself. So, that being said, the Ellington 1956 concert is special for several reasons. Of course, this is the concert that everybody agrees relaunched Ellington's career in a tremendous way. Put him right back in the limelight where he had been fading for some years, because you have to remember that by 1956, by the time that this was recorded, the context, of course, was that the big band era is long gone. It is gone. That era it was a very special time in history. Most music critics say it lasted from 1935 to 1945. That's the official dates of the big band era, 10 years. I say it started earlier than that. It started early 1930. There was already some large bands roaming the land and performing some jazz for dancing, basically, because jazz was the popular music of the day back in those days. And it started pretty much 1930 and ended, in my estimate, pretty much around 1947, 48. That's when most of the big bands started disbanding. A lot of them, because there was hundreds and hundreds of bands literally touring the country, the United States and Canada, during this era. That's how popular they were. But by 47, 48, things were changing. Bebop had emerged in jazz. Small group jazz was more the thing. Even by 1956, bebop was dominating, along with hard bop was dominating the jazz world. The small group is where it was at, the quartets, the quintets. And the big bands were out of the limelight. And the swing era had come to an end. And the fact that it had come to an end and that they decreased in popularity actually forced certain big bands to disband. And even the great names like Count Basie, by the end of the 40s, had to disband his big band and had to start leading small groups again. and temporarily keep his big band out of work, and then eventually reformed his big band and kept on touring to the end. But nevertheless, by the end of the 40s and early 50s, most of the big bands were having serious problems continuing and keeping the road work and everything just going. Only a few succeeded, and among these few was Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington never stopped working, never disbanded his big band. And that meant, of course, sometimes playing. 1951, 1952, he says he was playing to some empty rooms sometimes. By the end of his sets, by the time he would get to his last set of the night, he would be playing to empty chairs, and he relates that in his biography. So it was a hard time to go through for big bands. Their glory days were in the past, but their glorious music was definitely not in the past. And Ellington, I think, wanted to show off in 1956 when he got this opportunity to play this festival, this outdoor festival. He composed a special piece for the event and was ready to show off his music once again and show off his band members once again. And boy, did he ever do it. Did he ever succeed? Because this recording, of course, is legendary for one of the numbers, especially on the album, which is called Diminuendo in Blue and Crescendo in Blue. It was a two-part piece composed in 1937 by Ellington. A two-part piece that was linked together by a piano solo played by Ellington. But starting in the late 40s, he started asking Gonzalez, Paul Gonzalez, his tenor sax man, to play the interlude instead of him playing on piano. And it was getting to be pretty interesting what Gonzalez could do in linking these two pieces together with a solo. And Ellington had experimented this in the early 50s. So in 1956, when they were waiting in the tent to go back on the stage, he discussed this with Gonzalez, and he said to Gonzalez specifically, and this is Gonzalez that relates this later on, he says, Gonzalez, I'm going to give you the linking solo in between these two pieces. And he says, I want you to blow your heart out on this. Which is precisely what Gonzalez did. And I'll talk about what happened with this piece, of course, later. But what I want to say is right off the bat, when the band showed up, they were due to go on at 8:30, on the stage at 8:30. And when they showed up at 8:30, there was 4 musicians missing. One of those musicians was Clark Terry. I forget who the 3 other ones, but Clark Terry and 3 other guys went off partying and were just not there at 8:30 when time was come to go on. So Ellington was faced with a little bit of a dilemma. What do I do? Do I go on? Do I wait? Well, he went on anyway and played 2 numbers and then had to come off the bandstand because he needed the rest of his musicians to continue the concerts and play all his great numbers that he had scheduled for the evening. So they just went off around 9 o'clock. They went right back off the stage and went into a tent and had to wait for at least 3 hours before the 4 said missing musicians, showed up again. And Paul Gonzalez relates that they were pretty angry by the time midnight, by the time that the musicians returned, and it was midnight, and they were ready to go back on stage. They were pretty angry. He says, we had to work off some of that anger during the concert, actually. And that's why we were playing so hard, and we were playing so good. He says, we were really all pretty riled up at the 4 musicians that had been forcing us to wait all that time. So anyway, this is the context that was that the show was going to go, pretty much unravel in. So Ellington goes on, plays 2 pieces, gets off the stage, and goes back on at midnight, or around that time, and just musical magic is what happens. Because then it's going to be the triumph, because at the end, when this final piece of the festival comes on, Diminuendo in Blue and Crescendo in Blue, and Paul Gonzalez starts playing, the musicians start cheering him on, Ellington's cheering him on, and the crowd starts to work up a frenzy. And the crowd is starting to cheer Gonzalez on. And Gonzalez has got free rein. Ellington said, let yourself loose, let yourself go on your tenor sax and blow for as long as you like. And so Gonzalez is playing one chorus, two choruses, three choruses, four choruses, five choruses, six choruses. By the seventh chorus, a lady dressed in a black dress stands up and starts dancing in the crowd, which triggers on a bunch of other dancers to start dancing all over the place. People start standing up on their chairs and clapping and cheering Paul and the band on. And they're just working up just a frenzy. There's 7,000 people there at Newport. And George Wayne, the festival organizer, who's on the spot, starts to panic because he's talking with some of the policemen that are there for security. And he's starting to fear that there might be a riot. So he goes off to the side of the stage where he could see Ellington sitting at the piano. And he starts shouting to Ellington, Duke, you gotta stop the band. You gotta stop the concert. It's gotta end. We're afraid it might get out of hand. It might be a riot. We gotta stop it. Duke, we gotta. So he's shouting to Duke to stop it. And Duke turns around to him and says, "There's no way I'm stopping my band now." He says, I'm not gonna stop them when they're playing this good, because the band is really going. And Paul is playing that solo, and he's going strong. And just there's an atmosphere, an absolute fantastic electric atmosphere of hard driving, hard swinging big band jazz going on. And you think I'm going to stop this right now, Mr. Wayne? No way. And Duke just showed everybody what these jazz cats, these swing era greats, can do, and what a big band can do. And a big band was still very much in fashion and very much able to play some powerful straight ahead swing jazz. So here, you take this, you beboppers and your hard boppers, listen to this. This is really great stuff from the swing era, and it's not dead. It's far from dead. Music is alive, and Ellington was showing them just what it was all about during this concert. So he did not stop the concert, because also Ellington had the proper judgment to realize that if he stopped it then there would surely be a riot. So he avoided the riot by continuing and calming the crowd down by asking Johnny Hodges to come out and play, what was it? It was, I forget the piece, but anyway, a slow piece. And then followed up with Jeep's Blues. And then they followed up with a final number which featured the drummer Sam Woodyard on the drums. And the riot was avoided because Duke gave the audience their fill of music that they wanted to hear that night, and then stopped the concert abruptly. So thank you, Duke, for avoiding, for having the good wisdom to do what was right and avoid the riot and all that could have happened back then. But anyway, this recording, of course, I want to talk specifically about what happened with the recording, with the sound take of this great concert. What happened is this concert was being broadcast by the Voice of America over radio, and it was also being recorded by Columbia Records. They had set up two microphones and put X's on the ground on the floor of the stage to show the musicians where to stand, where they're going to play their solos, so they would be properly recorded. The Voice of America also had two microphones on the stage in order to carry the sound of the performance over the radio that they were broadcasting live. What happened was when Paul Gonzalez played that famous solo on Diminuendo in Blue and Crescendo in Blue that just tore up the house near the end of the concert, he stepped up to the wrong mic. He stepped up to the Voice of America mic and not the Columbia Records mic. So he was recorded by Columbia completely off mic. And there were several other off-mic issues during the recording, which prompted, after the concert was over and Ellington was packing up with his band, the Ellington producer in charge of the recording came to see him, the recording producer, for Columbia, came to see Ellington and said, "Listen, Duke, we've got some problems with recording. We're going to have to redo the whole thing in studio. I would like you to show up with your band at Columbia Studios on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Oh, Duke was not too happy about this. First of all, I'll show up, but not at 9 o'clock, because 9 o'clock, most musicians are sleeping at that time because they're up half the night. And so they showed up later on around 1 in the afternoon, but nevertheless, everybody was pretty frustrated at having to, basically, Columbia was asking them to re-record the whole concert They were going to overdub some of the parts. They was going to edit some of the concerts, put out some of the concert on record, but overdub some of the pieces with studio solos. Some of the pieces that they found were not right, or were some of the pieces were wrong notes were apparently played on some of the tracks by Johnny Hodges and others. They were going to overdub those in the studio with new studio recordings. They were going to put out also some studio recordings, but put some fake applause on them to pretend that they were performed at the concert live. And finally, they put out an edition that was totally, completely mingled, and really a bad edition of the concert. And if you have one of the early editions, the 1957 or 1960s or 1970s or 1980s edition of this concert, you're not getting the actual full Newport concert. What you're getting is about 40% of actual Newport recordings, and you're getting 60% of studio recordings, and you're getting some overdub stuff, and you're getting fake applause, and you're getting fake announcements that they actually asked Ellington to redo some of his announcements and record them again in studio and all this. So you're getting a lot of stuff that's just not genuine Newport Festival recordings. So you really have to go out and get this copy. I've got it digitally, so that's why I can't show you the CD. I downloaded these. I bought these on the internet as a digital download. It's the complete Ellington at Newport. That's what you have to look for. The complete Ellington at Newport edition. It's an edition that was put out by Columbia in 1999. They actually found also the Voice of America recording, because Voice of America also recorded this concert at the same time that Columbia was doing it. They were broadcasting on the radio, but they were also recording it. They found the tapes, so they restored the portion where Gonzalez was playing off mic because he went over to the Voice of America mic instead of the Columbia mic. Well, now they had the Voice of America mic recording, so they had Gonzalez closer to the microphone, and they have the proper sound balance on that, along with the reaction of the crowd in the background that you can see is working up a frenzy and cheering him on during his solo. So you've got this beautiful restored version, and they restored it in stereo because having found the Voice of America recording and their own recording, they combined these two together and put them on the left and the right channel, and you've got an actual stereo recording by mixing the two recordings in together. So that's a wonderful edition. It is the edition that you need to find. It's got several pages in the booklet, the accompanying booklet, that discuss everything that went on during the festival, why it was a great festival. You've got the original liner notes by George Wayne, and you've got added liner notes by Phil Schaap for the re-edition of 1999. You've got pictures of the lady here. This is the lady that started the frenzy, that started dancing in the aisles during the show. You've got pictures of Duke Ellington and Paul Gonzalez cheering on Paul Gonzalez and saying, "Go, man, go," during his solo. You've got all kinds of added stuff that comes with the booklet with this wonderful CD editions. It's 2 CD edition that will give you the complete Newport concert, unedited, with the real applause, with the real solos, with the flaws and all, and the apparently wrong notes that Johnny Hodges plays on certain numbers. I don't care if Johnny Hodges plays wrong notes. If Johnny Hodges plays wrong notes, I like those notes. I love them because Johnny Hodges is a legend of alto saxophone. He's got a phenomenal, beautiful sound. He's legendary in himself. So they've got the full unedited concert that you can finally listen to years after, like over 50 years. This is over 50 years after it was recorded that he finally released an actual, complete, real version of the whole show. And they've also added on the second CD all those studio takes that they forced the band to do. They have put them on the second CD also that were recorded just a few days later after the concert. So they put that out for the general interest also. So this is really the great edition that you have to pick up. Again, I want to say it's the complete Newport Ellington 1956 at Newport recording. That's what you got to look for. So I am the Jazz and Blues audiophile. This is the album I wanted to present. I strongly encourage you to go and get this album if you want to hear some great jazz. And until next time, I've got just one message for you. And you know what that's going to be. Get yourself some good jazz. Put it on your turntable or in your CD player or your whatever reader and listen to some good jazz and jazz on. So until next time, I'm the Jazz and Blues Audiophile. Don't forget to subscribe if you like these shows I'm making, these little episodes where I present an artist or an album. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel like that. When I put up a new video, you'll immediately know. And go ahead and comment. Feel free to comment. Tell me if you like this episode. Tell me whatever you think. I usually respond to my comments. And until next time, as I say, jazz on. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.